I raised my son, Michael, alone, from 2 months pregnant until he was 32, without a father, without help, without a break. And no, that's not a poetic metaphor to say that I felt alone. It's literal. His father disappeared after I told him I was pregnant. I was 24 years old, working as a waitress in a restaurant that smelled of fried food even after cleaning, and sharing a room with my younger sister, who slept listening to loud music and never washed her own dishes. Michael was born in a community hospital in St. Louis, with a moldy ceiling and nurses who looked more at the clock than at us. But when I saw that red, frowning, weird baby, so much mine, I swear to all that is holy that I didn't think anything in the world was going to destroy me. I was a mother. That was enough. The first few years were like I was holding the world in one hand and cleaning up vomit with the other. I worked 3 shifts, alternating between the restaurant and a night laundry, where the sound of the machines lulled me more than any music. I never slept for 8 hours straight. I never went to a party. I'd never bought an outfit that wasn't in the church thrift store, but Michael had milk, vaccinations, and a room of his own, even if it was the size of a closet. When he was 8, he had a fever so high that I thought I was going to lose him. I spent the whole night with him on my lap, sitting on the floor of the emergency room, while a nurse told me that it was probably just a viral infection. He was delirious, calling me Mommy in a tone that sounded weaker by the hour. I cried so much that night that the handkerchief I'd brought with me turned into a rag. When he got better a few days later, I promised myself that I would never let anything go. No medicine, no presents, no affection. And I kept it. For years and years, I was the only one in the audience at the school recitals, even when he was just a shadow in the corner of the stage. I went to meetings, even when the teachers spoke as if they were tired just looking at me. I was a mother, a father, a driver, a counselor, an ATM, an emotional punching bag. And deep down, I thought he knew that even without saying it, he understood that I had given everything. I was counting on this mute understanding. What an idiot I was. When he went to college, it was like cutting off a piece of your own body and letting it walk around. I remember taking out a loan to pay for his dorm room. Do you know what that is? Paying to be away from your own son? But I did it because I thought it was right. And I kept sending money, even when my gas was cut off, even when my account was in the red before the 20th. And he grew up. He graduated. He became a man. He became a stranger. For a while, I thought it was normal, that every son distances himself a little. He called less and less. When he did, it was always for a short time, with that hurried tone that seems to say, I have more important things to do. I cringed, smiled, and pretended everything was fine, until the calls stopped for good. Birthday? Silence. Christmas? Silent. And I still texted, Hi, son. I miss you. Everything okay? No reply. None at all. When he showed up with Sarah, I knew something had changed. She was too polite, too cold. She looked at me like I was an old piece of furniture that no one has the courage to throw away. I tried not to be bitter. I swear I tried. I cooked his favorite dish when they came for dinner. I asked her about her job. I smiled even when the conversation died in the air, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. Ever. And Michael, he saw and pretended not to. One day, out of the blue, he called me. His voice was strange, formal, like someone talking to a bank clerk. He said, in so many words, that maybe I should take a break from visiting, that Sarah felt uncomfortable with my presence, that it was better for the health of their relationship. I just kept quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't even shout, because it was there, exactly there, that I knew. My son had turned me off, disconnected like someone who cancels a subscription. And he still had the nerve to end the sentence with a, I hope you understand. Understand? What does a mother understand when her son says that her presence is a nuisance? What does a woman understand after 32 years of giving of herself to be called invasive? I didn't understand anything. I just felt it. I felt a pain so deep that it doesn't even have a name. And more than pain, I felt shame. Ashamed of having believed that love was enough. That day, I sat on the sofa and stared at nothing for hours. The house was clean. The dinner I was going to bring them still warm on the stove. But I felt like someone who had been kicked out of her own story, as if the mother I was had died, and no one had come to the funeral. That week, I found myself cleaning a house that seemed too big. Not because it had too many rooms, but because, for the first time, I understood that that space was no longer an extension of Michael and me. It was only mine, and it was an alone that hurt. I opened the windows to let the air in, but the air hurt too. Everything seemed to hurt. The noise of the rusty gate, the sound of the kettle, even the meowing of the neighbor's cat seemed to mock what was left of me. I tried to pretend it was just a misunderstanding. I tried to convince myself that he was tired, under pressure. Maybe she was pregnant, and I didn't know it. I made up all the excuses in the world not to accept that my son, that little boy who once slept cuddled up in my belly when he had nightmares, had simply decided that I was a nuisance. But it wasn't until I put away the lunch boxes I had prepared for them, with each one's name scribbled lovingly on the lid, that something in me broke for good. I had become the woman who cooks alone for a family that doesn't show up, the woman who puts the plate away as if, by magic, someone was going to knock on the door with a contrite smile and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." But nobody knocked. Only the wind, and even it didn't want to come in. I spent days in silence, a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that screams inside. I started walking around the house like a ghost. I touched his things, the graduation picture frame, the soccer team mug, the sweater he forgot here after last Christmas. I could smell the absence in everything. And every night, without really understanding why, I still left the porch light on. Maybe it's a mother thing. You wait, even when you know no one's coming back. Sarah never liked me. And, in retrospect, I think that's exactly why he stayed with her. She was the opposite of me. Distant, impersonal, calculated, and maybe it was this coldness that he came to admire. Maybe he got tired of my intensity, my way of asking him 3 times if he's eaten, of wanting to hug him all the time, of treasuring memories as if they were medals. Sarah was clean, white, empty, and he chose emptiness. Once I tried to get closer. I sent a message asking if I could visit them. She replied with an okay emoji, that hand signal, no words, just a mute gesture that seemed to say, whatever. I went anyway. I took flowers. She said she was allergic. I took cake. She said she was avoiding sugar. I took a photo album of little Michael. She didn't even look at it. She just fiddled with her cell phone, sliding her finger with boredom while my heart slowly fell apart. Michael looked at me like a visitor who has stayed too long. He didn't make conversation. He didn't ask anything. He just replied with short sentences and a smile that seemed to be stuck on with adhesive tape. I went home that night with the feeling that I had entered the life of a stranger, that my son now spoke another language, lived on another planet, and made no bones about taking me along. After that, I stopped. I didn't knock anymore. I didn't text him anymore. I didn't try to explain myself, because there comes a time when dignity wins over love, and that time hurts more than any other. It's not anger. It's not revolt. It's a weariness that is born in the bone, in the stomach, in the middle of the soul. A weariness of trying to be welcome where you're clearly not. The following days were even lonelier, and the worst thing is that nobody notices. Because when you've been a solo mother all your life, people think you're naturally strong, that taking care of everything is your role. But no one can imagine what happens when you're cast aside by the one you raised. There's no manual for that. There's no support group. There's only an echo. I began to remember everything I gave up for him. The invitations I turned down, the relationships I let go of because Michael is my priority, the bills I had to pay, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home from the club, even when he was an adult, the whispered prayers every time he traveled, the way I gripped the steering wheel for fear that he was ill, and I didn't know it. All that turned to dust. One afternoon, I sat on the kitchen floor with a box of old documents. Inside, the first ultrasound. The report card where he got a 10 in writing. The Mother's Day letter written in shaky pen, "Mom, you're my world." And there, on that cold floor, between yellowed papers and silent tears, I understood that perhaps I really had been his world. But a world is easy to abandon when you discover that there is another universe outside. And the worst thing is that he didn't even have to hate me. He just forgot me, which is even crueler. Life went on. The days passed, the seasons changed, but inside me, everything stood still, as if time had frozen the moment he said my presence was a nuisance. And no matter how hard I tried to keep going, to do the market, fold laundry, make the bed, everything was done like signing a certificate of absence. I was there, but I had no function. Sometimes we grow up believing that motherhood is a guarantee of love coming back, that if you do everything right, you'll be looked after in old age. You'll have a place of honor on family Sundays. You'll be listened to with patience and affection. But nobody talks about the other part, the part where you become just a piece out of the new puzzle of your children's lives, a piece that no longer fits. And that's when I understood. He took me out of his life as calmly as you move a piece of furniture, and he expected me to accept it in silence. But what he didn't know was that inside that silence lived a mourning, the grief of someone who is alive, but has been forgotten by the one they loved the most. Some people say that time heals everything. Whoever invented that phrase has certainly never spent an entire winter staring at a door that won't open, because time doesn't heal. Time only passes. And sometimes it passes over us like a truck loaded with things that were never said. And every day that passed without Michael looking for me, I felt as if he was erasing my footprints, one by one, until I couldn't even remember which path I had taken to get to him. I began to observe others like someone trying to understand a new language. In the supermarket, I saw mothers and children arguing about which brand of cereal to buy, and it made me want to cry. Not because of the cereal, but for the dialogue, for the space that still existed there, even if it was confrontational. I didn't have that anymore. My son didn't argue with me. He didn't ask my opinion. He didn't even include me in small decisions, let alone big ones. And his silence was so absolute that it made a noise, a dry noise, like that sound you hear inside your head when everything around you seems to have shut up on purpose. I tried to occupy myself. I signed up for a ceramics course at the public library, a group of lively, noisy ladies, each with a different pain. Most of them were talking about their grandchildren. I pretended I had some, just so I wouldn't seem out of place. It was easier to lie than to admit that my only son considered me a social nuisance, a risk to his image, too noisy to fit into the showcase he had set up with Sarah. One of the ladies, Mrs. Elaine, said something that stuck in my head for days. A son who pushes his mother away has no shame in his face. He's afraid of the mirror. I didn't know how to respond, because as much as it hurt, there was still a part of me that defended him. That said, he's confused. He'll come back. He didn't mean it like that. But how many times does a mother have to be rejected before she finally accepts that she's not welcome? There was one Sunday in particular that struck me. It was Easter, that kind of date that we pretend not to care about, but which deep down throbs. I baked a pie, just the way Michael liked it when he was a kid. I made it on impulse, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of nostalgia. I set the table as if someone was going to arrive. Then I stared at the empty plates, the cutlery positioned, the napkin folded with care. And in that scenario set up for a reunion that would never come, I realized how ridiculous it was. I was still waiting, like someone waiting for a train in a disused station. There was no track, no route, just the hard seat, the luggage of memory, and a broken watch. I decided it was time to get rid of his things, not out of anger, out of necessity. I went into the room that had once been his, the same room where, years ago, I hung birthday balloons, where I sat in the early hours of the morning holding a bucket for him to throw up in when he came down with school sickness, where I read stories until my throat burned. and began to pack everything up. Old clothes, high school books, soccer trophies. I put everything in boxes. Each piece cut me a little inside, but I kept going, because I realized that keeping everything untouched was like keeping a wound open and decorated. But when I picked up a small, light blue box with faded stickers and the remains of crayons, my hands trembled. It was where he kept the drawings he used to draw for me when I was little. One of them showed the two of us holding hands, with a caption written in crooked letters, "Me and the best mom in the world." That destroyed me in a way I can't even explain, because it was then that I understood the cruelty of time. Not only has it passed, but it has taken away everything that I had sworn would be eternal. That sweet boy with the big eyes and easy smile was no more, and the woman he chose to love demanded that he erase all the old versions of himself, including the one that loved me. I gave away almost everything. I left only a pair of socks from when he was 5, small, soft, with drawings of dinosaurs, because someone needed to remember that he was once a child, and I needed to remember that I was a mother. The neighbors began to comment on my seclusion. "She hardly goes out anymore. She looks haggard. She was always so dedicated, poor thing." I smiled when I met them, a shy, mechanical smile, because nothing they said could change the way I felt. Only one person could do that, and that person now thought that my presence bothered the woman he loved. And between the blood and the ring, he chose the ring. One night, I found myself looking at old messages on my cell phone. Those audios of him laughing, saying, "Mom, will you make that pasta sauce on Sunday?" Or, "I saved a piece of cake for you." The contrast between that boy and the man who drove me away was so brutal that it seemed like another life. I spent hours listening to it and turning it off. Each touch on the screen was a mourning. Each delete was like pulling a splinter out of my chest. But I had to delete it, because keeping it only served to feed a sick hope. The next day, I went to the market. At the checkout, I saw a woman who looked like Sarah. It wasn't her, but for a second, I swear I wanted to go up and ask her, "Why did you do that to me?" As if all the Sarahs in the world were responsible for turning mothers into foreigners. I went home with my face burning with shame for having thought that. But the truth is that, at that moment, I had no one to direct my pain towards, so it went up in smoke, and it suffocated me inside. When you're a mother, they say that love is unconditional, but nobody says that sometimes this love becomes a prison, because you love even when you shouldn't anymore, even when loving only hurts, even when the other person has already made it clear that they don't want to. And loving in these conditions is like holding a knife by the blade. You bleed, but you don't let go. Life goes on like an old machine that never stops, even though it creaks in every part. And we go on with it, because stopping hurts more. And I got good at pretending. I'd wake up, put the kettle on, butter my bread, read bad news, as if it were just words with no smell. And deep down, everything I did had a name behind it. Survival. I no longer knew who I was without the title of active mother. A mother who calls, who visits, who hears complaints from her boss, and makes soup when her son's throat scratches. Being a mother had given me a role in life, a position, a reason to carry on even when everything told me to lie down and give up. And now, with that job gone, I was nothing more than a woman sitting at home with memories that no one else wanted to remember. I tried to write. I thought maybe putting it down on paper would help me organize my head. But I couldn't write anything that wasn't about him. Michael sleeping with his sweaty little hand gripping the hem of my blouse. Michael calling me on the first day of my internship and saying, "Mom, I think they like me." Michael sitting in the front seat of the car, singing loudly, out of tune, with his bare feet dirtying the carpet. I wrote and erased because everything became a prayer, and praying to someone who can no longer hear only hurts the one who says it. Some friends tried to encourage me. "You need to live for yourself," they said, as if this simple piece of advice was enough to repair the rubble. Children belong to the world. This then became a favorite, repeated as a mantra by those who have never had the world tell them that their mother bothers them. I smiled and agreed, but inside I felt like asking, if a child belongs to the world, who belongs to the mother once the child is gone? It was on an ordinary Tuesday that I received the news. Michael and Sarah were engaged. I heard about it from a neighbor's acquaintance who saw it posted on social media, a black and white photo. The two of them smiling, she showing off her ring with the delicacy of someone showing off an award. No mention of me. No mention of me at all, not even between the lines. I looked at the screen like someone looking at a shop window with something that was once theirs, and I felt no anger. I felt nothing, a heavy, muffled nothingness, as if my chest had been filled with cement. I closed my cell phone. I took a deep breath. I got up slowly and went to the kitchen, as if to find something to justify my presence there. I ended up opening the fridge and staring into a glass jar with leftovers from a lunch 2 days ago. That looked like my life, the remains of something that once tasted good. The next few days were strange. I started walking more, going out aimlessly. I'd go to the square, sit and watch the birds. The truth is that I just wanted to see movement, people passing by, dogs barking, children running, anything other than the silence inside me. I started visiting my mother's cemetery more often, not to pray, but because nobody asked me for anything there. And, in a way, talking to her made more sense than waiting for a call from my son. I got used to this absence, because yes, even pain becomes a habit. I started waking up without waiting for messages, spending Sundays without setting the table, cooking just for myself. No matter how strange it was to see a small pot on the stove, where 3 were boiling at the same time, the television on to keep me company, the radio on in the background as an excuse not to face the echo of the house. One day, I received an unfamiliar phone call. I picked up automatically. It was Sarah. Her voice was dry, almost clinical. He said they were putting together the guest list for the wedding. I remained silent. She interpreted this as hesitation. Michael thought it would be good to let you know, since we don't know if you want to go. Her words came like thin blades, very sharp, without even raising her voice. I heard everything, every syllable, and after a while, I just said, "Let me know the day." She did, thanked me as if she had just given me some technical information, and hung up. I stood there, holding the cell phone in my sweaty hand, and thought, it wasn't an invitation, it was an announcement. I was an item on the organizational spreadsheet, a point to be resolved. And yet, my chest reacted as if it had received a flower, because, deep down, a part of me still wanted to be there, if only to see it from afar, to see that he exists, that he breathes, that he walks around in one piece. I was a mother, orphaned by a living child, and any crumb of presence served as a main course. The following month, I received the official invitation. A beige, odorless envelope with cold handwriting. Michael and Sarah invite you to a celebration of love. I stared at it as if it were a printed lie, not because of the celebration, but for the use of his name. Michael, that's it. No son of. No lines saying who watched him grow up, who stayed up nights, who paid for college with late installments. I kept the invitation in my drawer, not because I wanted to go, but because throwing it away seemed like something for someone who no longer felt anything. And I still did. I felt every inch of his absence as if it were a constant fever, a heat that never went away. The following week, I dreamt about him. In the dream, he was a child. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his face smeared with chocolate, laughing out loud. I was doing the dishes and pretended not to see, just to hear that laugh one more time. When I woke up, the bed was wet with sweat, and with a longing that seemed to weigh more than my body. I went back to my pottery. I made a heart-shaped piece. It wasn't pretty. It was crooked, with cracks, but I decided to leave it that way, because, somehow, that broken heart seemed more honest than any perfect piece. I took it home and put it on the shelf. It was the first object I made without thinking about whether Michael would like it. It was mine, just mine. And that hurt and healed at the same time. The wedding day arrived like a holiday when no one has invited you to celebrate. I woke up early, as usual. I made coffee, buttered my bread, and put on some clothes. Outside, the sky was clear, but inside, everything was fog. A thick silence crept between the walls of the house and reminded me of every detail of the last few years. The day he told me that my presence made Sarah uncomfortable. The day I stopped trying. The day I deleted the last unanswered message. And now this. The day my son would make official his new family, his new life, his new identity, where I no longer even fit in as an extra. I arrived at the ceremony site half an hour early, more out of habit than anxiety. The dress I chose was the same one I wore to my cousin's wedding almost a decade ago. Navy blue, simple, discreet. I didn't want to look like a shadow trying to attract attention. I didn't want to look like anything, really. I just wanted to fulfill the role I had left, to be present, from afar. Perhaps for myself, to put an end to something, to bury what had been veiled in silence for years. They put me in the last row. I didn't even bother to protest. I sat down, adjusted the hem of my dress, folded my hands in my lap, and stayed there. All around me were people I didn't know. Some were talking about the buffet. Others commented on how elegant and refined Sarah was, and that Michael had moved up in the world. And there I was, invisible, with my name printed on a card on the seat, but no eyes finding me. Nobody knew that that quiet woman at the end of the row was the one who held that man in her arms when he had his first asthma attack, who bandaged his knee when he fell off the swing, who defended him against a teacher who humiliated him at school, who wiped blood from a broken nose in a fight, and also tears of disappointment when he didn't pass the entrance exam the first time. The music started. The guests stood up. I did too, not out of respect for the ceremony, but out of reflex. The wedding march filled the space like an elegant cry. Sarah entered, splendid, as expected. Fitted white dress, perfect makeup, controlled smile. Next to her, her parents. Two gentlemen with starched collars and explicit pride in their chests. Michael was waiting at the altar. He had the same look I knew from afar, but which no longer belonged to me. It was the look of a man who had built a new life on the ruins of an old one. And he didn't look back. I watched it all in silence. I clapped when everyone clapped. I sat when everyone sat. I smiled when the moment called for it. But inside me, there was no celebration. There was just a cold realization. My son was no longer mine, and maybe he never was. Maybe he was just someone who passed me by, who needed me like a pair of borrowed wings, and when he learned to fly, he left his wings hanging in an old drawer and walked away without looking back. When it was time for the photos, I left discreetly. Nobody noticed. No one called out to me. No one asked, "Would you like a souvenir?" And I was relieved. I couldn't bear to smile in a photo next to a woman who had erased me from my son's life, with the delicacy of someone who deletes an old contact. I walked home slowly. The sun was starting to go down. The wind whipped my hair and I felt hollow, but strangely, at peace. It was as if I had finally accepted the death of something I had insisted on keeping breathing for too long. At home, I took off my shoes, dropped my bag on the floor, and went straight to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. My legs ached, not because of the shoes, but because of the whole journey, the years of effort, the steps climbed alone, the sleepless nights, the bills paid with a late salary, the birthdays celebrated with a cake bought with cash. All of this pulsed in my legs, and now they just wanted to rest. That night, I dreamt of him again, but not as a child. I dreamt of the Michael of today, with his beard trimmed, his suit impeccable, his wedding ring sparkling on his finger. He was looking at me, but without guilt, like someone who only recognizes the face of someone who was once important. And in the dream, I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of relief. Because, even there, even in that ethereal invented space, I understood that he was no longer mine. And that, for the first time, didn't tear me apart. It just hurt. The next day, I received a message from him. Short, formal. "Hi, Mom. I hope you were able to make it. It was all very busy. Thanks for coming. It was almost like a thank you note from a corporate event. I read it, reread it, closed my eyes, and I didn't reply. Because what I had to say couldn't fit into a text. It didn't fit into words. It didn't even fit me anymore. He didn't send me that to reconnect. It was just an empty gesture, like sending a Christmas card to the building manager. I stopped waiting, not out of anger, but out of energy. I began to rebuild a routine without ghosts. I adopted a dog, small, mongrel, noisy. I named him Simon. He followed me around the house like a shadow. And unlike my son, he never found my presence uncomfortable. I started cooking for myself again. I learned new recipes. I went to the market on Saturdays. I re-watched old movies. I gave myself a new radio. And in every tiny detail of this rebuilt life, there was one choice: me. Michael disappeared completely. No phone calls, no dinner invitations, not even at Christmas. And little by little, the hole he left was filled with silence that no longer hurt, with an absence that stopped throbbing. It was like a wound that becomes a scar. You know it's there, but it no longer hurts to touch. Sometimes friends ask about him. I say, he's fine, married, working, and they don't notice what hasn't been said. Because what's missing from those sentences is precisely what I've always had left: presence. Today, I look at myself with calmer eyes. I'm not the perfect mother. I was harsh. I was insistent. I was sometimes controlling. But I was present. I was faithful. I was love without interest, without conditions, without guarantees. And that, I know, can't be erased. Whether he'll come back one day, I don't know. But if he does, he won't find the same woman. The one who asked to visit, who begged for affection, who bent over backwards to fit into someone else's discomfort. She died on her wedding day. And the one who remained, this one who is writing now, learned to love with limits, to give without emptying herself, and, above all, not to beg for space in the life of someone who doesn't want to share the table. Because there are some things that not even a mother's love can sustain on its own. And there are departures that you have to accept, even when your heart is in living flesh. If you've made it this far, tell me something honestly. To what extent does love justify being left aside? And when will we finally understand that to love is also to know how to leave? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like it. Sa tradikyur.